I do believe that I have gathered the evidence, including this plastic hat taken by Gus Samuels in 1992.
You do consider yourself an expert on the subject?
Quite.
So I take it then that you have actually seen a Bigfoot?
Not exactly. I have smelled a Bigfoot. I have felt the presence of a Bigfoot. I have tasted the air where a Bigfoot has been. And I have heard a Bigfoot crying in the night.
Crying in the night, a Bigfoot?
Oh, it happens more often than you would think.
Uh-huh.
They're quite emotional creatures.
I threw that in there for you, Will.
I love that.
I thought that guy's pretty hilarious.
And you know, the sad part is there are some folks out there just like that.
Yeah, I know. I thought you'd find it funny.
I did.
Funny. So I thought what we do is, a lot of times when people hear reported Bigfoot sounds on recordings, a lot of times, I know like Woody and I, we've listened to some in the past, and we've always said, well, that sounds like a coyote to me, or that sounds like a fox to me. And a lot of people I don't think a lot of people know what a fox sounds like or know what a coyote, I mean, you kind of have a general idea what a coyote sounds like, but coyotes can make some weird sounds. So I thought what we do is play some audio of known animals versus reported Sasquatch sounds.
I think it's an awesome idea. I think people really should be better acquainted with things before, kind of jumping the gun and saying, well, that was Bigfoot out there.
Yeah.
Or the reverse even, saying, well, we heard noises, but it was we thought it was this, when it really might have been a Sasquatch.
Yeah. Did you see that? I think I sent it to you. Well, I think I sent it to you too, Woody, the email from the listener that sent us the BFRO report.
Right.
This is the follow-up investigation of the report, and this is report number 24405 if anyone out there is interested. The investigator out there said, I spoke to the witnesses on the phone, and the following details can be added. The witness and his young family were on their way home from Denver from Los Angeles for the Christmas holidays in late December 1973 when the sighting occurred. In the late afternoon, while traveling on Route 66 just west of Flagstaff, Arizona, the witness hit a strong snowstorm and pulled off to the side of the road to gain his bearings and check his map. He thought he might be lost because he didn't see another vehicle for miles and didn't even see any tracks in the snow covering the highway. He was driving a VW Beetle vehicle, which he left idling on the side of the highway. While looking at the map, he glanced up to catch the sight of what appeared to be a large, bulky, two-legged figure running towards their stopped car from the rear. He mentioned that the figure had unusually long arms and legs for a man. The head appeared pyramid-shaped but rounded at the top. It appeared to be covered in black or brown fur, and no clothes were observed. From his vantage point inside the car, he estimated the figure's height to be near 10 feet tall. He quickly put the car in gear and tried to accelerate away from the fast-approaching figure. The witness stated that the creature actually chased his car and came within 15 feet of the rear of his vehicle before he reached a speed of 45 miles an hour and began to put some distance between himself and the figure. The figure remained on two legs for the duration of the encounter, and at one point even raised its arms over its head. At the time, the witness was 24 years old and a member of the U.S. Navy and did not believe in the existence of the Bigfoot-type creatures. He said that he assumed that any reports of those creatures or Yeti were hoaxes or just imagined by people. This experience has changed his perspective, and he is now a firm believer in the existence of Sasquatch. He currently works for the U.S. Mint in Denver. I thought it was kind of a cool encounter.
It's interesting, yes.
I guess it goes back to intent. What do you think that creature's intent was?
Yeah, that always makes me think. When you listen to the different kinds of behaviors, what they were up to.
Yeah, you wonder what coming after the car. And it's funny he mentioned 45 miles an hour because I've read a few encounters where I don't know how scientific it is, but they tracked him at 35 was kind of the top speed.
Yeah, I've actually heard some stories, and I think people are exaggerating a little bit, but they say, they were doing 50, 55 miles an hour and had one, pacing the car. I think speeds around 35 are probably realistic for something that size.
Yeah, gosh, can you imagine sitting in your car and seeing that thing coming running up from the rear?
No, I had mentioned on a previous show, we talked about the sighting over in Wyeth, Oregon, near the Bridge of the Gods back in '88, and it made what you just said about him pacing a car reminded me of talking with some locals over in that area, and back in the 60s or 70s, there was, and I think he was a logger, if I remember correctly, driving out one evening after his day's work and had one running alongside of his truck, peering in, kind of leaning down, peering into the window, checking him out. And he said he kind of, basically crapped on himself and got out of there as quick as he could.
I bet. I'll tell you what, the first sound I want to play is from Canada. I'm sure everyone's heard this one before. Listen, this is a reported Bigfoot sound, and then I'm going to play a fox right after this. So listen to the Bigfoot sound first.
I think that sounds like a fox.
Yeah, what do you think?
I'd have to agree. I think it sounds like a fox, as well. I think I've heard that
one
before.
It has some very dog-like qualities to it, so it's not too difficult to figure that out.
Yeah, that's actually a reported Bigfoot sound. They claim it's a Bigfoot.
I would have said it was a fox or some animal, like dog-like animal.
Yeah, it's a weird sound, but a lot of people don't understand that foxes make weird sounds. Here's what a fox sounds like. Sorry, everyone. Those sounds are kind of annoying. But, the only one that threw me off in the fox one was that clicking, chattering. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Yeah,
it's hard telling what they were doing, but they do make a wide variety of noises.
Kind of a creepy noise, too. The whole screaming that it's kind of doing. I don't know. I call it screaming. I'm not sure if that's what you call it, but it's kind of creepy. I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Especially if you're out there not really familiar with animal sounds.
Yeah, hearing that at night. But I got a few encounters I want to play for you guys. So here, I'm going to play another one. This is Coyotes, and then I got a Bigfoot sound for you. I won't play the whole thing. It's kind of annoying, but you guys get the idea. So this was taken from Conway, New Hampshire. We've played this on the show in the past. This recording is from a guy sitting in his tent. He heard this this guy has like hours of recording of this thing. He started recording it, and here's what he captured. Tell me what animal makes this sound.
Vocalization. I would have to go, it could very well be a Sasquatch, that noise.
Yeah, I couldn't find any animal. I couldn't find any animal that matched up with that.
It's interesting when you played the coyote noises. I've had, I don't know if you guys have heard the Puyallup screamer noises from the early 70s. When you play known coyote, and they had, Green and those guys had recorded known coyotes, and if you played the two recordings next to each other, you play one and then listen to the other one and back and forth, they're similar, but the difference, because Sasquatches will imitate animals sometimes. You listen to the coyote noises, like the recording you played, they're kind of barky and there's multiple animals, where the Sasquatch, they'd be kind of long, drawn out, very strong, singular vocalizations. And to the untrained ear, you might say, well, that's coyote, except for there was the huge amount of volume with those recordings. They were similar enough, and of course we found out, through the state trooper there, that they were actually hunting coyotes by doing that. But that's an interesting side note to that.
Yeah, a lot of people think that's a black bear, or they'll think it's a bear.
I've never heard a bear make a noise like that.
No, here's what a black bear sounds like. Yeah, not even close.
No, and black bears aren't really loud either. They don't have a lot of volume.
You're right. Now I got a couple other sounds I want to get to, including I have a couple that sound like the Umatilla. I know Woody loves the Umatilla sounds. But,
yeah, those are great sounds.
Yeah, it's funny. I came across a bunch that sound just like it, but I wanted to play this encounter for you guys and get your guys' take on this encounter first, and then we'll come back to the sounds.
I grew up in the inner city here in Toronto. I was invited to go camping with a friend and his father up to Warsaw Caves, which is just outside of Peterborough, Ontario. As they said, growing up in the inner city, we didn't get a chance to do that a lot, so I jumped at the opportunity. At the time, my best friend would come back and tell me stories of when him and his father would go up there and have a great time, so I jumped all over it. This was a Wednesday, so Friday we head up, sleep. The next day we go out exploring the cave systems. I almost died that day in one of the caves. There was an icy ledge. You had to cross this icy ledge that was probably about 12 feet long, and it was sort of like that, and you had to kind of walk across. You had to start on one side, you had to walk across, right? But there was nothing to grab, and if you went down this way, it just dropped off. We threw a rock down before we crossed, and it took like 30 seconds to hear anything. You'd been dead if you fell. One flashlight, so that's trippy enough because the first guy goes, passes the flashlight back, next guy goes, and I was always the last guy because I was the least experienced, they said. So they would all go, and we'd be in some pretty little crevices where you're on your hands and knees, and even as a little guy, it was small. So, and his dad was a big dude. He's probably about 6'4", 280 pounds, big guy. And he did it, and we just barely fit. I don't know. He's very good at it. So, anyways, they all cross this ledge, and then there's me, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I get halfway, and I freeze because I start slipping. I start freaking out, crying. I'm gonna die. I'm sliding a bit. Every time I move a bit, I slide, and I'm stuck. And this is going on for like a minute and a half, and They can't reach me. They're just telling me what to do. I've got my fingernails into the rock, trying to grip it, and I'm sliding, and this guy's an idiot for putting me across that. I don't know what he did, but it was a wake-up call. Anyways, the weirdest thing is that all of a sudden my feet just felt like they had grip, like I had spikes on them. And I stepped up, and I stood up straight, and I just walked up this icy, rock face, which I had previously been slipping down. I can't explain it. Maybe it wasn't my time to go. I don't know. It was weird. I just stood up, walked off. Anyways, that was the end of that for the day. My friend would tell me when, after dinner, whenever these guys would go up before, the last couple of years they'd done it, his dad would, after supper, take off, and we had to go find him in the woods, or they would go find him, or he would go find him. So I was looking forward to that. Anyway, sure enough, after dinner, his dad's just gone. Okay, where's Steve? We're looking around, and he had gone west. We found out after. We went east. So we walked far. There was a field, and then there's a forest line. We get to that. Campsites and everything are way back there. We were on the outskirts of the campsites, the way his dad liked it. A bit of an anal guy like that. So we're on the edge. So that's fine. So anyways, we're in the thicket. We're deep. We're walking up a road, straight up a road, and at the end of the road, it takes a hard right. So just, straight up and right. But on the other side of that road, as soon as it goes right, there's a little outlet, little square, and almost like of a natural depression where nothing grew. It was just sort of dirt and, small bushes and little. But at the edge of this square at the back, there were trees, a couple of trees. One was a birch tree. As we're walking up the road, my friend yells, a monkey, and I immediately look and I hear it. And I hear this thing coming down this tree, and it's just its arms are going like this, but its legs are kind of clamping as it comes down, bang. And it was just, I can't really focus on the legs in my mind thinking back on it, but I can tell, or the feet rather, but I can tell the legs are just kind of going, doop, 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 stopping it as it comes down. Bark's flying everywhere. Leaves are falling, twigs falling off this thing. It just tore that tree up, but it did it so smooth. Beside the crap coming out off the tree, the bark's dying. You know how birch trees are. It just came down fast, and it jumped from like 10 feet up. It wasn't even at the bottom. It just jumped back, but it landed. And when it landed, it screeched at us. It almost sounded like a barred owl, but it wasn't a barred owl that, that exact distinct noise, but it sounded like that noise, that sort of a barred owlish sound. At any rate, it looked at us, gave this scream, and it took off. Boom! And it's on all fours, and it's running, and it's just sort of like a motion like that, and it's going, it's bounding, and it looks back, and it smacks the ground, and a stick goes flying in the air. I can remember the stick flipping up in the air. I don't think it grabbed it and threw it. Maybe it did. Maybe it hit, grabbed, and threw stuff in the air. It almost seemed like a caution move, almost like, don't follow me. This is what I get from it, that it was saying, like, don't follow me, I'm leaving. But if you follow me, I'm going to F you up, right? This thing was no bigger than us. It was skinnier. Didn't scare us at the moment. It was like, look at the monkey. What the hell is there a monkey doing here? Furry, black, jet black, dark black. The face, the face it wasn't like a chimpanzee or anything. It was all black. You could have said it was a shadow, but it wasn't a shadow because you could see fur. It was black, very black. So anyways, and then as it gets away, as it's running away, you could see it stand up. It gets taller and running, and it's running. But again, it's maybe a foot max taller than we are. Very, very slim. We're young. We're under 10 years old, right? 8, whatever, and we're both this high. And so it wasn't very big at all. It a juvenile, definitely a juvenile squatch. But it just got silent. It just stopped. We didn't see it stop, but as about 75, 100 yards in the forest, kind of you could see it, tree, and then silence. And we were sort of laughing, looking at this thing, kind of. And all of a sudden, just silence. and the forest just kind of came in on us, and it was just, whoa. You know, it just got creepy all of a sudden, right? But we weren't afraid. We didn't run back. We just kept going. But it was sort of like, that's really weird. You know, in retrospect, if I knew what I was looking at, I would have been, holy crap, you know? Anyways, we're talking about it. We're laughing about it. We get back to the campsite, and his dad's there. He's worried sick because we hadn't gone the right way that he thought we would go. He didn't think we would go away from civilization. He thought we'd go towards it, and that was his strategy. And he was in a tree hiding. Anyways, we told him about the monkey, and he said, but I wasn't there. That wasn't the way I was. Anyways, this thing was much smaller than his dad was, so his dad didn't really say much about, we saw a monkey, okay, kids, so, you know, why did you go that way, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, it wasn't until, I'm going to say, I don't know, it was a little bit of time later that I started, you know, seeing shows. I saw a show, Leonard Nimoy did that show, and it was just this creepiest show in the 80s. It just, you know, in the 80s, that the way that the cameras looked, and just really gloomy, and the music, it just scared the living crap out of me. And it was a light bulb, and it was like, oh my God, I saw that. I saw one of those. These things are real. And it was from that moment on, I was infatuated, just infatuated with Sasquatch.
That's a great encounter. And, you know, you listen to the details. Young Sasquatches, and that was a very little one. You know, first of all, the very fluid motion, which made me think of you and Woody's account, you know, of how that one moved, or the two of them moved, actually. And then the coloring. You know, Sasquatches, when they're young, are almost jet black, their hair. Then as they mature, they turn more of a reddish brown. More often than not, there are some differences, but the majority of sightings are a cinnamon or reddish brown color. And the screeching and the behavior, it's very, very commonplace, you know, the particulars among encounter stories.
Yeah, too. I think that encounter was very interesting. The part that I really liked was him explaining when the Bigfoot, it sounded like it was running in the opposite direction, and it turned around, put its hands on the ground, and either threw the stick up, or when it hit the ground, it knocked the stick up. But regardless, he had a lot of different details that, in a certain order or sequence that I think would be hard to make up, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I think that was a really good encounter.
Yeah, his details were great. They were right on the spot.
Yeah, and the screaming he talked about. You know, Will, you talked about the screaming, them screaming to alert the rest of them, and that's kind of what I was thinking when it kind of turned and screamed at them. I got another one I'll play for you guys here in a little bit, but it has the same type of, you see the same type of behavior between the two, of the screaming. It turns and kind of screams at them, and
I don't know. The first thing it did in his case, it screamed, so that was obviously an alert. You know, was probably scared of them, plus Mama had to be nearby somewhere.
The other one I want to play for you guys, I'll go back to sounds. This was from Ohio State Park, and this is a reported Bigfoot sound. Tell me what you guys think of this one. Doesn't it kind of sound like there's a lot of different animals in that one?
It does. It sounds like there's 2 or 3 anyway.
That's funny because I was going to say the same thing. The beginning of that, actually, I don't know what you guys think, but it kind of reminds me of the Umatilla sounds, the very first part of it.
Yeah, right.
Sounds like the Umatilla sounds. And then I was actually going to ask you guys what you thought, because it sounded, well, obviously you can hear the dogs barking in the background, and you can hear a couple of other things, but did it sound like there was multiple Sasquatches there, or is
I think there were multiples, yeah.
It's hard to tell exactly how many, but yeah, that was really cool, I thought.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of things we hear on the West Coast here.
I know on the encounter that we played, the guy talked about barred owl sounds. So I'll play 3 sounds for you guys. I'll play the barred owl. It's not very long.
I think he meant barn owl.
Yeah.
Is it barn owl?
Is it barn
owl?
Yeah, barn owl.
Right.
I thought it was barred owl.
No, barn.
Is it barn owl? Really?
Right.
I think you guys are wrong on that. In fact, you know what?
Let's just call it an owl.
There you go.
No, but I think it's barn owl. I've heard that before, Will. I've heard the same thing.
Yeah, that's a common term.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second here. See what the word on the street is. Actually, it's called barred owl. You guys want to apologize now? Yeah, B-A-R-R.
Why don't you read us the definition and then we'll think about it.
Yeah, we'll think on it.
Anyway, like what he said, here's an owl. And there is such a thing as a barn owl, too. Your guys' story checks out.
Well, we're all right then.
Yeah. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Dick Tracy. We appreciate that. We appreciate looking into that.
Yeah, your story checks out. But there is a barred owl. Anyway, moving on. Here's what a bobcat. I'll play a bobcat and then we'll get to the Umatilla sounds. I think we all pretty much know what that is.
Yeah.
Not everyone though, so I thought I'd play it. Now getting to the Umatilla sounds. So I have 3 sets of sounds for you guys to listen to. One is the Umatilla, and the other 2 sound just like the Umatilla. Now, witnesses have reported the sound sounding a lot like a hyena. Once you hear a hyena, though, it doesn't really sound like a hyena. It kind of, I guess, like a cartoon hyena, but it doesn't really sound like what a true hyena sounds like. Here's what a hyena sounds like. More disturbing than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. That reminds me of sometimes how I feel on Sunday morning after a bad whiskey Saturday night. Those sounds.
That pretty much sums it up.
No, those were some pretty.
Just Sunday morning? Just Sunday morning?
Come on, guy. You know
we're
on
Saturday
there,
right?
night too. This is coming from a guy that just walked in and handed me a beer, Will. So.
I see. Well. He's an enabler.
Yes, he is.
Now, Woody, be sure to record him tomorrow morning so we can have a comparison.
Oh, I'll be calling him bright and early, trust me.
Yeah. Anyway, on that note, here's the Umatilla sounds.
January 21st, about 11 p.m. I'm a couple hundred feet from my house, and you hear it going off in the background right now. Kind of sounds weird. Kind of sounds doggish, hyena-ish, but you can hear it going off in the background right now. It's really kind of strange, just to say the least. It's been going off for about 15-20 minutes so far by the fire station. And it's pretty crazy, so if you can listen, that'd be crazy. Hold on. I mean, that almost sounds like laughter. It's actually gotten closer since it started. It's probably only 200 feet, 300 feet from me right now. I don't know what it is or what that is going off right there. You can hear it. I mean, I've seen foxes and coyotes around here for a long time, and I'm not sure why, if foxes and coyotes have been around here that long, why we wouldn't have heard them before. And all of a sudden, since November, things have been just going crazy around our community. Sure, my friend who's doing a documentary on Bigfoot will enjoy this footage. Gunshot. Somebody just shot over into the woods.
Well, that was no barn owl hillbillies, but...
No. You know, that noise is really similar to what we were hearing in South Hill Puyallup with this Puyallup screamer thing. Back in those days, you know, Green and the rest of those guys, they described it as a half bark, half laugh. And I think that pretty accurately describes that sound.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, the first time I heard those sounds, you guys, they kind of put chills, you know, gave me chills. And even today hearing it, and I've probably heard that thing probably 30, 40 times, those sounds. There's just something about that sound, those Umatilla sounds, that I feel is not right. It's creepy, and I do believe it's a Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if I was living in Umatilla, I'd be looking for another place to live because I wouldn't be staying there.
You know, it's like the Snohomish, Washington sounds from 1974, the Puyallup Screamer. You go down to Klamath Falls, 1993, Myrtle Creek, Oregon. I can't remember what year that was. That was in the mid-'70s sometime or late '70s. But they're all very similar. If you get a chance, listen to those noises.
What was it one in Klamath Falls you were saying, Will? Could you say it again?
Klamath Falls, 93. Those always raise the hair on the back of my neck because I've heard those noises up around Mount Rainier, Graham, and Mount St. Helens. I've heard those up and down the coast many, many times.
I think it's kind of odd that you get the same sound out of different areas. And the Umatilla sounds, that's the first time I've actually have heard that. As I was going through looking at, or, trying to find different sounds, I noticed I came across that same sound over and over and over again.
Yeah, for it to be a real creature, it's got to be consistent.
Yeah, and it is. I got an encounter for you guys, but I want to play this one for you guys. Tell me if this sounds just like the Umatilla sounds. This was near Yosemite National Park. I got one more for you guys. This is near East Texas.
Get that. Look. It has to be out there. Come on.
I love how the kid goes, is it a coyote?
You know, that Yosemite one it sounds exactly like the other ones I had mentioned, from Snohomish all the way down to Klamath Falls. Very, very similar. And even the one from East Texas isn't that much different. I mean, there's some very strong similarities among all those recordings.
You guys, what I think was kind of cool, and you guys might think I'm weird for saying this, but if you take the Umatilla sounds, you take the ones from Yosemite and the ones from East Texas, yes, they all sound very similar. But I think the really cool thing about it, and Wes, you probably understand this more than a lot of people because you do a lot of, working with audio tracks and stuff like that. But if you could take out all the background noises and you could just have the sounds of these squatches, and if you could look on a graph, it's almost kind of like if you could see a visual picture of their of when they start these screaming, because they start at kind of a lower noise and then it goes up high and then it comes back down again a little bit at the very end of, as their vocalizations. It's almost like they're all at the same type of frequency. You know how people have different tones and different sounds of their voices. Well, you probably agree that maybe Sasquatches are kind of like that too, but it's funny how they all kind of reach, the frequencies are all kind of the same in these vocalizations. I thought that was it would be cool to pick it apart and see visual picture of it, like a computer thing, like, to where you could see how high the frequency is, and then it coming back down, because they sound very similar.
Yeah, and you're right. That's something that Dr. John Napier many years ago talked about, that people go out and they collect footprints and all these things, but really the vocalizations give you a lot more information, because those things can be charted and they can actually tell the volume of the lungs that made those sounds.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really cool to do that. I mean, you have to get all the outside. That's more than we could probably do, but it would be interesting to maybe on another show we could kind of look into that and see what, like you're saying, maybe find out what people have to say about it.
Hey, Will, in all your research, and you've heard that noise before, what do you think they're doing? Is that like a mating thing?
There's a couple of thoughts that I've had. When we talked about how they move through ranges before, and they spread out and feed and do all their various activities. It could be for signaling. It could be for mating. For group, not like the ones you guys encountered, the group was actually together at that instance, but normally they're spread out from one another. So it could very well be. I mean, they don't really have many means, if they're hundreds of yards apart or even, a mile or two, those screams will carry through the mountains very well, that high-pitched, that sound. And, of course, that goes all the way back to the Indians, and you look at a lot of their artwork, and they always depict them with their mouth, their lips in a pursed, round configuration, and that's because that's what they've always done. They've made that high-pitched noise. So it's either signaling of some kind to one another, whether it's danger, a leader saying, hey, it's time to move on to the next feeding area, mating call. I'm sure it's used for various reasons.
I realize it's just kind of a shot in the dark, but I was kind of curious on what your take on it was. That particular sound that they make. I guess it's kind of hard to say, what it is, why they make that sound.
I mean, unless you really, were observing them and seeing what kind of behaviors they were doing. Of course, in, Puyallup, I always refer back to that because that was my first real exposure to the, real Bigfoot hunting with the big shots at that time. And what they were doing there was they were hunting. They were imitating sounds like the Umatilla sound. To me, that's sort of, it's a little more coyote-ish. And, to an inexperienced ear, someone might say, well, that's a coyote, because it's very similar to a coyote noise. But if you know what coyotes sound like, there's none of the yipping and barking, and sometimes, coyotes do kind of long, drawn-out moans, and there's always multiple noises, more than one together. Usually they're in their little pack. In that case, they were drawing the coyotes in, instead of having to, lay in wait for them, because coyotes they'll follow other animals because they're a predator too. But since the Sasquatches were hunting them and eating them, they were using the noise to lure them in.
Yeah, it's just a really odd sound. I mean, it's just, like Woody said, that one's always kind of bothered me, because I can't find anything. I mean, I literally could not find any animal to match it, not even a hyena. I know you said it kind of has a bark and a laugh, but even animals that we don't have in North America, I was trying to find something that was close, and there was nothing that was even close to it.
No, and when I mentioned the barking laugh, that's just how John Green and Dahinden and those guys, and I'm not sure where they got that from, whether it was Indians or somebody, or that was the best they could describe the noise. And when you listen to it, it does kind of sound like a combination of a bark and a laugh.
It's a good description.
Yeah, it's probably the closest we could get to it. I mean, if we had to put it in words, I don't know how else you'd describe it. Scary.
That's how I would describe it.
Well, you're out in the middle of the night like you guys were, 2 in the morning out in the middle of nowhere, and something like that cuts loose. Yeah, it's an underwear changing moment, but...
For sure.
Nice. Well, I got one last encounter for you guys to listen to, and then I have another Bigfoot sound. This was a guy that was describing his encounter with a white Bigfoot, but what I found interesting about this encounter, kind of noticed the same type of behavior as in the first encounter that I played. Tell me what you guys think of this one.
And it comes on down, and it probably stops about no more than 40 yards from me. I'm sitting here this way. It walks down the hill. It stops, like I said, no more than 40 yards, which is not that far. I didn't, he's talking about flipping somebody out, man. And it turns and looks at me. Or I assume it was looking at me. It turned and it faced me, and it was standing like that with its arms hanging down. And I was trying to make its face out. I mean, it was solid white from top all the way down. Even its arms, everything I'd see was white. And it looked at me probably for not too long, maybe 5-10 seconds, which seemed like forever. We kind of sitting there looking at each other. I was sitting, he was standing there, and this thing screamed. What I've always described it as is like a woman screaming, real loud. Wow. Now this is exactly what happened. I can, like I said, it's been 30-some years ago, and I can see this as plain as if it was yesterday. Well, this thing screamed, like I said, like a woman screaming real loud. And it turns and it takes a couple big leaps down the woods. Stops, turns around back at me, and there's a tree that looked to be probably about that big. So this thing starts smacking this tree. And that tree, I could see it going. And when it did, I made a beeline like a rabbit back to the house. Now, I deer hunt a lot, and there's hardly ever hunts that I go on that I don't think about that. And actually, I live right across the road from where this happened, that field. And I never quit thinking about that. Well, I thought, after I got back to home, I thought, well, could have been a person. No, it was too tall. There's nobody around that I know of that was that tall. Nobody had arms as long as this thing had. And I ruled that out, So I thought, the only thing it could be is a white Bigfoot. I know it's some kind of an animal. It's not a ghost. That wasn't a ghost. That's some kind of animal. But it was walking like a man. And there's a lot of people I would tell, at that time. And I've told all through these years, 30-some years. And then I could care less who believed me,
right.
when I know what I saw.
Right.
People, they'd laugh and say, oh, you saw this or that. Well, I know what I saw. The only thing I can describe it as is a white Bigfoot. And I have heard of people seeing what they call gray ones. Maybe, gray, white, looks white to me, and I still don't care, I don't care who believes me and who don't. I know what I saw. Some things like that, you just don't believe it when you see something out of the ordinary like that.
Did you guys notice, the guy interviewing him would laugh at the most awkward points? He's like, I ran for my life. The guy's like, ah, ha, 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 ha.
Kind of like you didn't believe him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, really? It's like
some interviewer, huh? Nice guy. Real sympathetic.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. The poor guy that's getting interviewed. He's you can tell the emotion in his voice, and then the guy's laughing at him. I don't know. Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Not a good combination.
I
didn't technique.
He's pouring his heart out to him, and the guy's like, ah, ha, 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 ha.
I noticed that.
He's like, no, really, I know what I saw. White or gray, whatever it is. He's like, oh, ha, ha, ha.
Well, it was an interesting account, and with the screams, and of course, white ones. That's not out of the question. There are white ones. It made me think of an account, and I got to tell you guys this. I remember me telling you about the former Hells Angels guy that I met at Mount St. Helens back in the early 90s. Now, this guy was 6'7", 300 pounds, big guy, not fat, big. And he was, back in the early 60s, told me they're the number one enforcer for the Hells Angels in Southern California. And he told me one time, now he said, at this point in my life, I wouldn't hurt a fly. I've changed, my outlook on things. But he says, I can't tell you how many men I've killed in the past. So he was a guy, that just didn't care about much and didn't mess with people. You know what I mean? He had a Bigfoot encounter. He said, me and my partner were riding up through southern Oregon. They went to look for the Port Orford meteor, and this was in the mid-'70s. They went by this lake and made camp, and there was a big ridge above the camp, and they heard this scream about 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they thought it was a guy, coming down the ridge. Every so often it would make this just loud scream coming down the hill. And finally, it came to the edge of their camp. The firelight was lit up the area around the camp, and there were some small saplings, probably about 30 feet away from them. And this thing kind of burst into this edge of the clearing and grabbed the trees and was just thrashing them and screaming at them. And he says, I'll tell you, Willie, I felt like I was going to be eaten by this thing. So they each had 30-30s, and they shot it in the chest at the same time. And all it did was screech and run off. And he said, I'm here to tell you, all we did was get on our bikes and get the hell out of there. But, like in that account, where it hit the tree and was making the vocalizations, a lot of primates do that. They'll use objects, usually vegetation or whatever they can get their hands on, it's a dominance thing. Whoever can make the bigger noise and exhibition usually wins the battle of dominance. So I think that's what they're doing in these cases. If it does the vocalization, it's a confrontation with a threat, which is the man. The same in his case, and I've heard it Lord knows how many times in the past, very similar kinds of things. But they're doing things with the vegetation, they're screaming, and it's almost like, it's a challenge. It's either, get the hell away from me or you're going to get attacked.
Yeah, and that seems to be a lot of people's take on the whole thing. A lot of people say that, exactly what you say, Will, they felt like it was kind of it was showing its dominance. It was showing, stay away from me. A lot of people, like the first encounter that I played, he took that scream and it tossed him the stick or hitting the stick as don't follow me. And
even
was trying
at
to
that
show
young age, the creatures do that, and the communication is very clear.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
I was just going to say, am I the only one that's kind of dumbfounded? Will, you're talking about the Hells Angel guy. He shot him twice with it. Two of them had 30-30s, and all it did was make a noise.
He shot in the chest, and he just screeched and ran off. He said, so they got out of there before it decided to come back. He said, they felt like it wanted to eat them. That was their.
Yeah, well, I know that feeling. I know that.
I can sympathize.
I know that feeling. I was just kind of sitting here, and I was like, man, they shot it twice with the 30-30. Like, how big of a gun do you need? I mean.
Oh yeah, I've talked to people with 30-06s that have shot them, and kind of the same thing. I mean, of course, you're talking about an animal. You remember when Rebecca last week was talking about the size of the thing she saw. Her dad was a big guy, and his one shoulder would, 3 men would make up the size of his shoulder. So when you're talking in terms of ratios, to us, a 180-grain bullet's pretty big. It would do a lot of damage to us. But to something that big, in perspective, it's more like, maybe like what a 22 bullet would do.
I guess you're right. If you take the ratio, the size of the gun to what the size of the thing you're shooting. But just to me, I was kind of dumbfounded. I was like, oh my God, they shot it twice with 30-30, and it kind of got pissed off and ran off.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry to change the subject.
That's probably what I would do if I got hit with a 30-30.
I think I'd get the hell out of there. Yeah.
Well, you're pissed off all the time anyway, Les. So.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on to the next sound. So the last sound I'll play, actually there's two sounds. One is a gorilla snarling, which we don't have gorillas in North America, but sometimes you hear a Bigfoot snarling. And the last one is a reported Bigfoot sound. So I'll play the gorilla sound first. So here's the reported Bigfoot sound. It has nothing to do with the gorilla sound. I just wanted to play my monkey sound. So here is the reported Bigfoot sound.
That's one of the recordings I had mentioned earlier. It sounds just like one of them. I don't know if you have what the reference that came from, but
no, Mr. Barnell, that wasn't one of your sounds.
See, I'm not even paying attention to that. My status doesn't allow me to dignify that sort of remark. So, But, you know, the Yakult, when we were investigating Yakult, they were making noises just like that every night coming down Yakult Mountain.
Yeah, it's kind of that screaming. I wish I would have gotten one of the Bigfoot roarings. You know what I'm talking about? I know you guys know what I'm talking about, but where you hear the Bigfoot roar. But that's pretty much. I know what you're talking about. That's pretty much all I had for you, hillbillies. You guys gonna watch the $10 million Bigfoot bounty?
I'm not planning to.
Would? I guess he's still on mute.
Did we lose him?
No, I was just doing hillbilly stuff. That's all.
Oh.
No,
that's right. Don't
be
interrupting hillbilly stuff.
Yeah, no, I might watch it. I don't know. Cheap entertainment, I guess.
I'm sure I'll get lots of people email me and tell me about it, but.
Yeah, I had a clip I was going to play, but you guys kind of peed on that, so I guess I won't play that clip.
You guys know that I was actually one of the first people they contacted to be on that show.
Yeah, and you weren't crazy. Yeah, he wasn't crazy enough.
Yeah, in fact, when I was getting ready to film the episode for America's Book of Secrets, you know, the mystery of Bigfoot, I was in the outer room waiting to go in and be filmed. One of their casting people called me, and we talked about it. And I was intrigued at first until I did a little research and talked to some more people there. And basically, well, at the time I didn't really have, you know, I couldn't get out of my work commitment at the time to go do it anyway. But they've got 9 teams, 2-people teams, and they're in an area relatively close to each other, running around trying to collect Bigfoot evidence. And they have a panel of judges that are supposed to. I mean, it's a reality show, so they're, you know, people are going to be going away, I suppose, each week. You know, the first thought I had was, really, you know, you guys know where Sasquatches are, and you're going to send 18 people out there racing around the woods, and they're going to find something. So I told them basically that, you know, if they wanted to do a serious project, they could I'd be more than willing to listen and be involved, but. You know, to me, that's just silliness, I think.
It sounds like kind of a game show to me.
Exactly.
You know?
It's a reality show. That's what they told me. So, you know, they're not going to find proof of a Bigfoot like that. It's just retarded, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree.
It sounds like
you know, it's probably entertaining and all, but it's not serious. I don't think it's a serious effort.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like The Voice. Like how many hillbillies will turn their chair for Justin Spija?
I know, right?
I love that. That's great.
Who's going to be your coach today?
That's pretty much all I got for you, fellas.
On behalf of Wes and Woody and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for, you know, listening in and saying such great things to us. Until next time. We'll see you next week on Sasquatch Chronicles.
Did you guys hear about the woman that called in to the Coast to Coast with George Norrie, the Kaylin?
No.
Have you guys read about that yet?
Uh-uh.
Oh, man. She, I'm so tired of the crazies in the Bigfoot world. So she described how she lived. How she lived in a cave with this male Bigfoot for 3 weeks.
Oh, good.
And she describes long conversations using telepathy. She could come and go as she wanted, she said. And she goes back once a year to spend a week with this male Squatch, according to her. So that's pretty awesome.
Oh, good grief. You know,
it's like a vacation for
real nutcases out there.
Yeah. Tell me about it. And I really want to go off on a tangent, but I'll try and use some self-control. I'm fighting a cold, so it may not be easy tonight.
Yeah.
But I came across this interview with John Green back in 1999. Will, you knew John Green. You knew Rene Dahinden, all these guys. And I think for anyone out there...
quite well.
Yeah. I think any of these guys out there that, whether they have a passing interest in it or if they're a researcher, they should really research these two guys.
And those two in particular, I was thinking about it earlier today, you know, because I knew Bob Titmus and Grover Krantz and a number of other people who were kind of the original pioneers of this whole subject. But it was Green and Dahinden who were really the two top. And summarize those two guys, Dahinden was the heart and soul of the search, the early search, the initial finding out that there was something worth looking at in the subject, and Green was probably the public face. You know, they both had extremely important parts to play in it. The two of them guys, I think, were both indispensable in getting the whole world to know what the term Bigfoot meant.
Rene was, I didn't realize how larger than life a character Rene Dahinden was. And Green, you know, all these guys, in this interview I'm going to play for you, John Green answers. For people who don't know John Green, he was born in 1927. He actually first started beginning to investigate Sasquatch sightings and tracks back in 1957 after meeting Rene Dahinden. And the two of them kind of collaborated together. I think Green's best known for, he's authored, I think, several Sasquatch books. But, yeah, I think that Apes Among Us is probably the most popular. In the interview, he goes through, and I would say he answers probably 95% of all the questions people still ask today. And he's very direct, and he's very to the point, and it makes sense. For me, when I listened to it, it just made sense. I was like, you know what? He's right. He's right. I mean, there's nothing that he said that I couldn't really argue with.
Most people think, and I've had people contact me and say, well, you know, we know so much more today than they knew back then, and that's really not true. There is nobody today, in my opinion, that is anywhere near the caliber of those two men. And they had already more than well thought out all the questions regarding this topic.
I would agree with you. Let me play this interview with John Green, and then we can discuss it. I have a few encounters for you guys. I won't keep you guys too long tonight because, like I said, I'm fighting this cold, and I feel like I beat dogs, so.
You know, these footprints are real. Something has to make them.
What do you think that something is? What do you think the Sasquatch is?
Of course, an ape. A bipedal ape. I mean, you've got two facts that cannot be in any way challenged. Something makes huge, somewhat human-like footprints. And it should be possible to find out what that something is. And also, all over the world and throughout history, and in very much so at the present time, people have been describing seeing these very large, hair-covered, bipedal animals. The fact that there are all these people who tell of this experience also cannot be challenged. These people exist. And that also must have some explanation. Well, you've got, unless you wish to go into supernatural areas, you've got only two possible explanations. Either there is an animal which accounts for all the stories and the footprints, or else this has been a human activity throughout the world and throughout history, manufacturing evidence that such an animal exists. And the test of Occam's razor is that you take the simpler explanation.
Right.
And the simpler explanation is that there must be such an animal.
What characteristics, if I was out in the woods and I encountered a Sasquatch, what would I expect to see based on your findings?
Well, presuming you're looking at an adult, it would be much bigger than a human. If it were in a normal position, or if it were traveling, it would be upright, moving like a human. It would be totally covered with hair. It would be not only much taller than a human, but proportionately wider, proportionately thicker through to a much more extreme extent. So you have a thing that is immensely heavier than a human. For a big one, a weight of a ton is not at all out of proportion according to the way they're built.
One of the lesser-known things about some of the sightings is that it makes noises. There's been certain recordings of screams they've made. And the other thing is the smell. Is that common sightings, or is that a rare exception?
The range of noises that have been claimed for this thing is very wide. The most usual one is a high-pitched scream. But we don't have a a single instance of anybody recording the sound and at the same time recording the creatures making it. So really all of the sound evidence is speculative. I mean, you can't claim anything factual. This is the sound the Sasquatch is making. It might be, in some cases probably is, but there's nothing to establish that. As to the smell, certainly there are many instances in which a strong smell is described. But in the majority of cases, when the witness is close enough so that you would expect a smell, there isn't one. So it would appear that it's a smell that can be emitted on purpose, which this material was available about the Sasquatch years ago. Since that time, it has been established that the same is true of gorillas.
They secrete a smell that they're in danger.
Yeah, if you read Diane Fossey's work, the large male silverback gorillas have what she calls a fear odor that they emit from special glands in the armpits. So I would speculate that it's something similar taking place here. It isn't that the things stink to high heaven all the time, but that under certain conditions they can emit a strong smell.
If you're out in the woods, if one's out in the woods, what should they expect in an encounter? And what can they do to so that they can provide some sort of information for the authorities, for people like yourself who compile this evidence?
Well, if they see the creature and it stays there, or if they're lucky enough to observe it when it doesn't know they're there, they should certainly just take note of every specific detail that they can remember or write down, or of course photograph if they have a chance. And quite bluntly, if they're hunting and they've got a heavy rifle, they should shoot it, because it's just an animal.
Right.
There's no case for treating this animal differently from other animals, and shooting animals is still a common practice in this society. You make an exception for this one, it's only because of its resemblance to us, which I don't consider a valid reason. And scientifically, this is absolutely essential, because science will not accept that these things exist until they have a piece of one. They've got every other form of evidence in spades, they won't even look at it. They've got to have a physical piece of it. And until you prove that it exists, well, try halting the real estate industry in Florida in the name of an imaginary animal. And yet there is probably the one case where these things are definitely endangered.
The habitat's diminishing as well.
The habitat is being paved over, yeah. And you can't stop it. I mean, the thing isn't there.
What about native folklore? And what can you tell me about how Sasquatch fits in with that?
I've never gone into that to any great extent. For this reason, that in the Indian culture, as in nearly all cultures, there is no sharp dividing line between the real and the unreal. Everything is real. And this was also true of the European culture that we've inherited until just the last few hundred years. But now we make an absolute distinction. We put everything either on one side of that line or the other. And from my association with it, the key element in this whole thing has been which side of that line the Sasquatch falls on. So information you get from a culture where there is no line isn't very helpful.
What's the latest report or sighting in Harrison Springs?
one 20 miles up the lake last year.
Last year?
But they're not common around here.
No.
They're not actually common anywhere. It's just that they cover such a tremendous area that they add up to a great many.
And what did they see in this last sighting?
It wasn't a particularly good one in that it wasn't a large thing and it was under very poor lighting conditions. It was a bear hunter, and he thought he was following a bear into the bush, and instead of that he saw this dark human-shaped and human-sized thing looking at him partly from behind a tree under heavy cover. So he thought it must be his hunting partner and tried to talk to him. And when he couldn't get an answer, then he backed out of there onto the road, which he just started into the bush. The road was only a few feet behind him, and found his partner standing on the road. And so that, you've got all you have is a totally dark, human, apparently sized figure he was quite close to it. I think it was 30 or 40 feet, but under poor light conditions. But it's got to be either a person or something, or one of these. It's not anything else.
What's the most southerly report you've received in British Columbia?
Sorry?
What's the most southerly report in BC of a sighting?
Well, we get very, very close to the border.
There's really no border with the sightings. Suddenly,
no.
Right down to California.
The border isn't relevant to the Sasquatch.
No. Do you think it's a creature that migrates then?
No. No more than in the normal sense of being probably up high in the summertime and lower down in the winter, and if going wherever there's available food, but not in the sense of walking hundreds of miles to change the climate. No. That's one of the first things that people assume, and people have been looking for evidence of migration, and it just isn't there.
What are the characteristics? You've also been to Russia to look at the investigation at the Russian Academy and the Chinese Academy have done.
Well, hold on now. There's no Russian Academy involved.
Well, there was a Soviet Academy of Sciences then.
No.
Well, they gave it awards.
Well, they had an expedition years ago. That's true, but they didn't find anything. But the people who are researching it in Russia are much like ourselves. They have an association with the Darwin Museum in Moscow, and they have a seminar of their own, but there's no official backing in Russia. So
they're just as stepping to the idea as Western scientists might be. Are they as open-minded as Western scientists are to the idea, do you think?
No, these aren't scientists.
Not recognized scientists, then?
They're, as I say, they're amateurs like myself.
What about the so-called Patterson film from 1967? We actually see the creature walking. Mm-hmm. A lot of people claim every year that this is a hoax. What is your take on that? Because this is one of the most important pieces of evidence.
Yeah, the Patterson film is a movie of one of these things walking across a sandbar. Yeah.
Some people claim that it's something in a costume, someone in a costume, or what do you say to people who say that it's a fake?
I don't know what they're talking about.
What is it about the film and the research or whatever that's been done on it that makes you believe that it's a real creature?
Well, in the first place, there either are these creatures or there aren't.
Okay.
If there are, then this is a movie of one. But as to studies of the film specifically, it's been studied by experts in Russia and in England in biomechanics, It's been studied in the United States now just recently by a man whose specialty is the evolution of bipedal walking, bipedal locomotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, just recently been studied by one of the top experts in the enhancement of things like surveillance videos and so on, and been digitalized to the point where I think there's some dozens of CD-ROMs involved. And this man is no longer doing it, and nobody else has the sufficiently sophisticated hardware to make any use of it. And none of these people have suggested that it's fake. And the expert in bipedal locomotion is trying to get a paper published in a proper scientific journal. And the enhancement man has issued a report of his own. The Russian work was done many years ago, back in the 70s. The head of an institute studying, the mechanical functioning of physical bodies. I talked to him through an interpreter when I was in Moscow, and he reiterated what he said before, that he had no interest in this subject. He just looked at the thing as a favor, and it changed his whole concept of walking, because this thing walks better than a human. Jeff Meldrum at the University of Idaho, the bipedalism specialist, has done what we always had some misgivings about, because some of these footprints don't have the short toes like the ones we're looking at here. They have long, wide-spreading toes, and we always were uneasy that some real expert was going to say, well, this is impossible. If one of these is genuine, the other is not, or so on. Instead of which, Jeff, working with both types, worked out a foot design that's quite different from a human foot, despite the generally similar shape. It requires you to walk in a different way, not pushing off with the toes, but using the ball of the foot, and not propelling yourself forward, pushing from the foot that's now behind you, but pulling yourself forward with the foot that's ahead of you.
So how would someone be able to hoax that?
Well, and then after he's worked this out from the cast, and he's traveled all over photographing and studying cast, really studied more than anyone else ever has. And then he describes this way of walking, and I probably simplified it to the point where not totally accurate, but he describes this way of walking. You look at the movie, and there the thing is doing it. When a human walks, as your weight passes over the weight-bearing foot, your leg is locked straight. You take your weight on a locked knee. This thing does the exact opposite. The maximum bend of the knee takes place when the weight is directly over the foot. And for that reason, it has to pick up the other foot very high to bring it past the bent knee that's supporting the weight. And so automatically you get the bottom of the foot almost vertical as it's pacing. It's totally different from the way humans walk.
So, like, the strongest evidence for the Sasquatch are the footprints, and you've got two here. Can you tell me a little bit about each of them here?
The one on the right, the plain brown, is a cast that I was myself involved in making. That is in Northern California, up on a ridge where they were building a road, and this print was in very deep dust. And on that occasion, there were the prints of two creatures at least. By the time I got there, you could only be sure there were two. road construction foreman who'd found them, or a contractor actually, said there were 3 sizes, but we only saw 2, but we saw more than 600 footprints. And they'd all been made in a single evening after dark, and during the time when this very dry dust was very hot weather, had been sprinkled and moistened on the surface with a little bit of rain. And all of those that were in the ruts where traffic moved had been destroyed by the time we saw them. So we're certainly more than 1,000 of them originally. The other one is a copy, actually. The original cast is just a flat gray, and that's a copy that's been painted to make it stand out more. And that was in a muddy spot on the slough of the Skeena River, quite near Terrace. Footprints were found by some children, and a friend of mine who's now dead was more involved and more successful in this research than anybody else, and was living in Hazelton at the time and was contacted by someone who knew of it. Went there and made casts of a left foot and a right foot. There were only the 2 good prints in this one damp spot.
Are they?
That was in the 1970s, I think 1976.
Is it difficult to? I mean, I imagine in some cases there are hoaxes of footprints people go out to do. But how difficult is it to hoax a Sasquatch print?
Oh, it certainly can be done.
It can be done.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard of one
in various specific instances, it's very hard to see how it could have been done. For instance, what I just mentioned, where you have to make 1,000 prints in a matter that literally is in minutes, and yet they're so big that you'd have to sculpt them. There's no way you can just walk along and make them. Another case, there were prints an inch deep in a hard, damp sand on a sandbar, where I personally jumped off a log about 2 feet high, and to get an imprint that deep, I had to land on the point of one heel. So either you've got tremendous weight, or again, you've had to dig it out. But there are pressure cracks in the material around and so on. There's no sign of anything being dug. In that instance, you couldn't get a machine in there. There were brush-covered steep banks down to this creek, and downstream there was a big log jam, and upstream there was a canyon with vertical walls and deep water. So, you could have come in by helicopter, but even that wasn't very practical, because there were people living in a construction camp just a few hundred yards away. When you start trying to explain all of this as a human manufacture, it gets so totally convoluted that you come back to Occam's razor. You're building castles in the air when there is a simple explanation. It's not an easy explanation to accept. In a way, you're dealing with 2 impossibilities. You start thinking that there is such an animal and it's never been found dead. We don't even have a bone. Well, you reject that automatically.
But we have found, there has been some hair samples reportedly found.
Yes.
Even a handprint and some feces, which have not been, they've been analyzed, but nobody's been able to determine what they are.
Yes.
They're not a black bear or something we know. So
I'm not confident about feces analysis.
Okay.
Hair, apparently they've been unable to get enough DNA to work with out of hair. It's up to now. I mean, for years we've been expecting something definitive, even if it's just to say no, throw it all out. Mm-hmm. And we don't get any answer. there was just one instance with hair, and this wasn't DNA, it was immune reactions that did seem convincing. But the person who did it said, well, this has got to be either human, chimpanzee, or gorilla. Well, you could have eliminated all three or confirmed or eliminated any of the three within minutes with a comparison microscope, but he had ground up all the sample. He was an immune reaction expert, not a hair expert, and it didn't occur to him that he needed to keep any. So now these are brown hairs to begin with, and gorillas and chimpanzees are uniformly black. It included guard hairs, and human guard hairs grow endlessly, and they're therefore always cut off. They don't have points. All these guard hairs were pointed. And the hair had been collected one hair at a time by the same man who made that cast, going through the brush in a place where footprint evidence indicated one of these things had gone. And this is in Northern California. Well, the number of brown chimpanzees and gorillas that go through the brush in Northern California is quite minimal.
That's right.
Well,
if the Sasquatch does exist, do you think it is a separate creature unto itself, or is it perhaps a missing link to our ancestry?
No, it's a totally separate creature. I mean, it either exists or it doesn't.
Right.
You have people speculating that 20%, 40%, 60% of the stories are hoax or mistakes or mass hypnosis or hysteria. It doesn't work that way. Either there is an animal or there isn't. If there isn't an animal, then 100% of the stories are wrong. If there is an animal, then there's no reason to question that the vast majority of them are just the same category as people who say they saw a bear. They did see one. So you've got a great deal of information, even though there's very little information in most sightings. They just saw something run across the road is the common one. But nevertheless, out of these thousands of reports, a great deal of information about what these things do, and of course about their physical characteristics.
What's their typical connection with people then?
Well, let me finish what we're dealing with. All of this indicates a creature whose adaptions are totally physical. It's solitary, it's enormous, it's tremendously strong, it has a full coat of hair, it swims very well even underwater. It can run faster than almost any other animal. It can run down deer. It has never had any pressure to survive on its mental abilities. It lives very much the life of a bear. And this is the exact opposite of the story of the evolution of humans. The fact that both species have ended up walking upright is the only reason why we relate them to humans more than we do other creatures.
Well, there's nothing you can argue against what John had to say. I mean, he was right on the money.
Yeah, and I like how he's just he puts it in simple man's terms. As a matter of fact, he's very factual. Either it is or it isn't. And I really enjoyed the interview.
And like what he said about the percentages, of how many stories were real and fake. Even if one story were real, well then the whole thing is real. There are certainly some that are, made up stories, but not a lot. The percentage isn't big. But yeah, he was, and that's why I mentioned earlier about Green being sort of when they first began all that, him and Dahinden, being the face of the issue. He's the one that brought it out as a journalist. He's the one that introduced it to the public, where Rene was the heart and soul. He was the driving force to get people to seriously look at this stuff.
What did you think about when he was talking about shooting? He said if you see it in your scope.
I knew you were going to ask that. I was going to ask that, but I didn't know if I should.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. I think it's a question that a lot of people have, and a lot of people have different ideas about it. I personally think it's going to be. I'm for it. I think it's going to be one of the only ways that we're going to have definitive proof, kind of like what John said.
Yeah, and those guys had thought this question out over and over and over 40, 50 years ago. And it was, I remember back when they were talking. In fact, when I first met Green and Dahinden, in fact, when I met those two men, I was 17 in 1975, and it was their very last field expedition together as a team. They never worked together after that. But Green asked me before the road camp, he asked me if I owned a 12 gauge, and I said I did. And he told me, well, you're going to want to, nobody's going to believe, that footprints or hair or pictures or anything is going to prove that the Sasquatch is real. He says the only way we're going to prove this is to actually have a specimen. And he says either we find one that's already deceased or we have to bring one down. And he said the best way to do that is to alternate double-aught buckshot and slugs in your shotgun. And he said the best way is if one's walking away from you, use the double-aught buckshot for knockdown power. And he says shoot it in the lower spine. And he said the slug is to kill it. And they were both very matter of fact, and they only backed off that publicly in the 80s because of, and I still think it's more prevalent than it was then, but then it was more of a kind of a vocal minority voicing opposition against that idea. But privately, Dahinden, Green, Krantz, they were all still in favor of bringing one down, although Krantz did talk about tranquilizing one, but the problem with tranquilizing is you have a weight range anywhere from 300, for a moderate adolescent to an adult upwards to 1,000 pounds. So how do you adjust the dosage? Either you kill it outright or it gets away. So, and they were right. I mean, after, they weighed all the questions. Nobody's smarter today than they were back then. They had already been through all this material. So the consensus really still holds today. I mean, look at all the people running around and all these supposed proofs, and the issue is not one inch further than it was back then.
No, I would say we've almost gone backwards a little bit. But as far as the tranquilizing, Woody and I have talked about that in the past. And tranquilizing, a lot of people don't understand. They think you just put a gun, you shoot it, and the animal goes down. But, like you said, well, if you get the weight wrong, either you're going to kill it or you're going to piss it off. And
it's a very fine range.
If you piss it off, you're going to have to shoot it anyway. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So what's the point?
Right.
And you could end up being killed in the process, or somebody with you.
Yeah, I thought he was pretty straightforward and to the point, like what he says. He's very direct, and he's very kind of dumbs it down to the conversation was to the lowest common denominator. You know what I mean? And I like that about him.
Yeah, no, John has always done an excellent job on communicating the issue to everybody.
And the people that get upset about killing one, I'm going to go off on my tangent. I promise you guys I wouldn't, but I'm going to go off on a tangent.
Go right ahead.
Woody, you might want to filter me out a little bit on this, but the people who get upset, I've noticed, obviously Woody and I are kind of new to the community. I mean, we've only been in this for just over a year or so. The people who get upset about shooting one are the same people who will post on Facebook, don't kill them, no kill policy, and then the next day they have the audacity to put a picture up of an empty plate and tell you a Sasquatch ate the cookies the night before. And if you're so upset about someone actually wanting to prove the existence, people, when you say killing one, we're not talking about slaughtering all of them. It's kind of like one and done, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so the people who get upset about it are the people who talk about telepathy, talk about, you know, they go out to their spot every week, you know, like this lady I talked about in the beginning, she, like what he says, you know, vacation, she goes and sees her Squatch man once a year. But they don't, if you're so against shooting one, get a video camera and start shooting some footage of these things and put it out there for people to see. And I think you'll start to see people back off from the attitude, hey, we got to shoot one and bring it in. If people started putting out all this footage for people to see, I think you'd see a lot of the talk of shooting one, people would back off of it. The same people who are so upset about shooting one, they don't provide anything. It's like the guy out in Sasquatch, Canada, or what's it called?
Yeah, I know what you're trying to say. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I can't think of it either.
The guy that got him on audio, like burping the alphabet, and you know, it's saying Flower and Mike, and you know what? If you get them burping the alphabet and you get them out there saying your name, and you're teaching them language, hey, how about shooting a video of them? You know what I mean?
It's too convenient to say they have that relationship, but they're protecting them so they don't have footage or they don't let anybody go there. So they end up, you know, sort of maintaining their position without having to prove anything. And I'm the kind of person that's like, put up or shut up. You know, if you're not going to put your proof where your mouth is, don't talk to me. That's baloney. You know, like John says, and I'm from the school of Green and Dahinden. They were the guys who trained me and brought me into this. It either is or it isn't. It's black and white. You know, I don't buy the, you know, the gray areas. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm going to, you know, dump on anybody who does. You know, everybody's, you know, perfectly free to have their own views, but that's my view. And, you know, you shouldn't be able to get away with just running around saying any old thing and preventing the issue from moving forward. And you know, I can't disagree with what John said about taking a specimen, because really that is the only way that it's going to be proven.
And I think maybe, too, some of the people out there that are so against the shooting part of it, or taking one down and shooting or killing one, I think a lot of them maybe think that Bigfoot has more human characteristics than it does ape. And you hear John even saying in that interview, he's like, no, it's its own thing. It's its own animal. And
right, I agree with that.
You know, and maybe that's why some people are so against it, because they think that there's more human characteristics to it than ape-like or animal-like. And according to John, you know, he was talking about the way it walks and stuff like that. And the only thing that humans have, according to him, that is within the same characteristics is we're bipedal animals, or bipedal.
Well, you know, the consternation of the issue is more about us than about shooting a Sasquatch. It's like I've mentioned on previous shows about, you know, the term that anthropologists used called anthropomorphism, which means we apply human characteristics onto non-human species, and which is exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I can kind of understand where people are coming from based on whatever they believe, but you know, my belief is let's get one and get this thing resolved.
No, I totally agree. I can see where people are coming from too, and just, you know, different views on, you know, harming any sort of wildlife and things. I understand that. I mean, I quit hunting a number of years ago just because I didn't like killing animals anymore, but taking a specimen of a Sasquatch to get it done, to get it past, you know, the amateur's hands and into science where it belongs and can be dealt with properly, really is where this should go.
I'll tell you why people are upset, and this is tangent number 2. So, Woody, get your filter button ready. I'll tell you why people get upset. If one were shot tomorrow, it'd be a little hard to explain all the leprechaun powers that people say that they have. And I think a lot of the attention that people are getting from all these stories about telepathy and Bigfoot raped me mentally, and I go and hang out with Bigfoot once a year, and, you know, out of the vacation home and, you know, vacation cave, all those stories would go away and all the attention would go away. I think that's why people don't want one brought in. I think that's the hidden agenda. People will come out and say, well, we don't want one shot because they're people and blah, blah, blah. But I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of people realize, hey, if we brought one in, it'd be a little hard to explain all these leprechaun powers I said they had, and I've been telling people for years, and now I'm going to look like an idiot.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I couldn't agree more with that, and because it would go into science, and there would be, all the people that jump on the bandwagon would all of a sudden be out of business.
And you can send me your hate mail at williamjevning@yahoo.com.
That's all right. They can send whatever they want to me. I know what I know, and
man,
throw me under the bus there.
You can send all your disgruntled email there. We'll read it and address it.
That's right. I was trained by Rene Dahinden, so I can respond like he used to. And anybody who knew him knows what I'm talking about.
One thing I did get out of his interview, Wes, and it kind of went back to our encounter. When we saw the ones that we saw, and the whole knee thing. Him explaining the different how they use the front foot to pull themselves and how the weight is distributed. And I thought that was real interesting because that's one of the things that I noticed other than the size of the Bigfoot that we saw, or Sasquatches. That's the first time I've heard someone actually put it in such a simple term to where I could really understand on why I was seeing when I looked at the knees on it and why it was looking the way that it did. So I like that part of it too. I like the whole interview, to be honest with you. It was really great.
I picked up on that too when he's talking about how when it walks forward, it actually pulls itself instead of like how we do. We kind of get the momentum going forward.
Yeah, with us, It's like walking on stilts. We sort of, pole vault to the next position where the Sasquatch doesn't. That's a completely different mode of locomotion.
And that probably explains, I'm sure there among many other things, but explains how they move so smoothly, how they move so, it's so quick and so smooth. And
yeah, they're better designed than we are at walking bipedally.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed that. The other thing I picked up on, and I know we've been doing it in the show, a lot of people don't realize it, but with encounters, we talk about behavior, and John Green talked about you can actually get a lot of information from a really good encounter. And that's another thing I really appreciated.
Absolutely, and that's what I said before about where people, these people who claim they're, Sasquatch hunters or researchers or whatever title they put on themselves, is you have to kind of question what the motivation is behind what they're doing. Most people go out and collect these stories up, and then they either post them on the internet or whatever, and it's more of a trophy. They're not using that information, to learn from and to further the quest, to prove the Sasquatch is real. They don't pay any attention to the particulars. It's interesting you talked about vocalizations there, and I actually took him myself closer to a Sasquatch than he ever got to be to one. When we had our encounter out by Fort Lewis in 1976 with the screaming and all that, we took him out there, and no sooner than we had gotten out of his VW van, the group of us, right at dusk, they started screaming, and when we left, I visited him sometime after that at his home in Harrison Hot Springs, and from that time forward, whenever I'd talk to him, he'd say, I'm still kicking myself for not taking a recorder that night. He says, we had the Sasquatches out there screaming, and I could have had it. Yeah,
I liked how he said in there, we don't really know the sounds that they make because no one's actually recorded one making a sound, but they're probably making these sounds. And I think that's the best way to describe it. I know we did the Sasquatch sound last week, and I think that's a really good way to describe it.
And, it's even with things like footprints, and I use the example when I talk to people too, is we can't 100% say that those are made by a Sasquatch unless we had one being filmed walking through an area that had no prints and we saw the creature leaving prints. Then we could say 100% certain, yes, that a Sasquatch made those tracks. But even with footprints, and as good as most of them are, you can't really say for 100% certain that was what that is.
You're right.
Well, were needing some really good National Geographic type film footage, you know, where you're kind of hidden in the brush and you're filming, you know, the Sasquatch doing all these different behaviors and things.
Yeah. And that's what we need, you know. I think a lot of people would back off of the shooting if people start producing. If your buddy's with them and you're out there burping the alphabet, you know, or you got a vacation cave, snap a few pics.
That's right. Emailed your buddies, you know.
Yeah.
Summer with Squatch.
I'll tell you what, guys. I know we're getting down on time, but I had 2 encounters for you guys to listen to, and they're pretty short. The first encounter is a 72-year-old lady describing an encounter that she had back when she was, I believe when she was 12. If you get a chance, listen to the behavior of her parents as she's describing this encounter. I kind of get the impression her parents know a little bit more than what they were leading on to. But take a listen to this encounter. Tell me what you guys think of this.
Well, this happened many years ago when I was a little girl in Southern Illinois. How old were you? I was approximately 12 years old. It would have been 60 years ago. It was the end of the summer months when the berries got ripe, and there was always blackberries and that kind of stuff that grew wild in Southern Illinois. And my mom always canned and made pies. So she asked us to go berry picking with her. And I was the only one that said I would go with her. So we got our buckets and we went out, started outside not too far from the house, which was, well, to start with, the place was probably a good 2.5 to 3 miles off the main highway, back into the woods and towards the timber. Down a gravel road and down a gravel lane, there was only our house and one other house that set up probably a half a mile in front of us, away from all the trees, but we sat next to the trees. At one time, there had been loggers back there, and they had left old equipment and stuff sitting up and down the little dirt lane. Anyways, we went berry picking, and we started up fairly close to the house, and we started picking berries. Well, the more further we went, the further we got up towards this bluff where all the trees and everything was at. And not even thinking, we just kept picking berries and having fun that somewhere with my mom. So we kept picking berries. On up the hill we went, slowly up the hill, getting berries. And I said, Mom, do you think we got enough berries? No, she said, let's get a few more. So we got a few more berries. And by then we were like up this bluff at the top of the hill where the trees and stuff started and all that, really deep into the woods. So we put picking berries. We got up there because I said, Mom, we started to turn around and go back because she said we had enough berries. So I didn't know it, but Mom had already saw it before I saw it. And we started walking, and every time we'd take a step, I'd hear this crunch in the leaves. And when I'd stop, it would stop. And I said, Mom, do you hear that? She said, oh, it's just the rabbits and squirrels and stuff. She said up here that's making the noise in the leaves. Don't be worried about it. Just turn around, keep going, don't look back, and let's get home. So I started, took a few steps. I could hear this crunch. I'd stop. It'd stop. Mom said, don't look back, just keep going. So I didn't listen to my mother. I turned and I looked back, and I could see down at the bottom of this, up from the opposite way would touch the top of the hill, and I could see this thing walking along there, and it was huge, and it was furry, and it had to have been 6 foot tall, at least 7 foot tall, because we were standing up and it still looked huge. So anyways, I said, Mom, I said, do you see that? She said, don't worry about it. She said, keep going. She said, don't look back. I said, Mom, let's run. She says, no, don't run. She said, just keep walking slowly, keep going back towards the house. And so I did, until we got to the very bottom of that hill. And we got to the very bottom of that hill. I said, can we run now, Mom? She said, yes. You can run if you want to now. So we ran home. We went home and told my dad and my siblings what we'd saw on our berry picking route. And Dad said, well, if that's what you actually saw, he said, there's no bears that are that huge down here. He said, we don't have anything like that. And he said, what you saw was Bigfoot. And so he went on and forgot about Bigfoot after that because he wasn't in our house. Everything didn't scare us anymore. Anyways, it got colder, and it was like we had one big empty room that we didn't use. And we had it closed off, but my mom had taken a clothesline and tied from corner to corner in the room so she could hang her clothes in there in the winter because she scrubbed on the board. We lived in Southern Illinois. We didn't have a washing machine. We had a scrub board. And you have to remember that was like 60 years ago. A lot of people down in the Southern Hills didn't have washers. A few had old wringer washers, but my mom had a tub. So anyway, she had went in there, she had hung her clothes up, she went in to get a dress out that she planned on ironing for the next day. And all of a sudden we heard my mom scream, she just as loud as she could scream. And we heard her feet hitting the floor as they come bouncing through the door into the other room. We wanted to know what was going on. Dad said, Jane, what in the world's going on? I said, why are you screaming like that? And she said, well, wait. She said, I reached to get my dress off the line. She said, I saw this great big huge thing standing there tall as the windowsill, stooped over, bent with his hands up to the window, looking at me. It was big and hairy. And so Dad, of course, went out, but there was nothing there. He didn't find it, of course. And after that, we was very leery. We didn't go out at night and play in the yards like we had before.
Interesting story.
Yeah, the one thing I will say the story has going for it is it was simple. It was a simple story. It wasn't, there was no leprechaun magic going on. There was no, it was very simple. They saw what they saw, and that's what she had to say. I don't know. It was it sounds like a decent encounter to me.
Do you guys get the impression her parents knew more than what they were leading on? Like her mother saying, don't look back.
It did that impression, didn't it? Like they had seen it before.
Yeah. Yeah, it made me think that
when
her parents... Go ahead.
That's kind of what I thought, too, when they were up there picking berries. She's like, don't turn around, just keep walking. And it was almost like, she's seen it before, but I have my kids out here with me, so let's just be cool. I like the story. I like simple stories. I don't like a whole bunch of stuff that sounds like, it didn't sound like she was making stuff up as she went along to make the story sound better. So,
right, I agree.
I liked it.
The last encounter I got for you guys is a hunter recounting his, he's sitting up in a deer stand, and he actually sees one of these creatures. The one thing about the story is this guy sounds like Woody after our encounter. And I thought Woody was just insane, but this guy...
Wow.
Yeah. No, I mean, this guy's attitude on the whole thing. Take a listen to this. Tell me what you guys think of this.
My first thought was, there's an old, naked, hairy, gray, silverish-looking old man in these woods, but really hairy. And as I took a second look, I knew what I was looking at. About to my 2 o'clock position, maybe 40, 50 yards away, I heard a stick break or snap. I wasn't sure if something snapped a twig or stepped on it or whatever. I looked over, and there was nothing there. I looked back, and I said, let me reach back here and find my safety belt again and bring it around and snap it, because that might be a deer coming up through that tree line there. So I'm trying to get my safety belt, and I couldn't get it right, and all of a sudden I heard something else, and I had to look up again, and there that thing was standing there. That's when I knew whatever I was looking at was real, because you can see the muscles flexion. You can see the skin underneath the hair. There's no way I could have been hoaxed or fake. I know what that thing was real. And that thing, and when it disappeared, I was actually standing up, and my legs were vibrating and shaking because of adrenaline. I don't know. I'm not going to kid you or anything. I was scared to death. I was so scared that this thing was probably watching me at that point. I didn't know, but I actually walked out of them woods backwards. I did not want whatever that thing was running up behind me or walking up behind me, you know. So once I made it to my vehicle, I threw the crossbow in the trunk. I jumped in the driver's seat. I locked the doors, and I just sat there. And at that point in my life, I didn't have a cell phone then in 92. But it hit me so hard, I wanted to call the president. I wanted to call my mom and dad and say, it's real. Oh, my God, it's real. I saw it, you know. Mm-hmm. I couldn't. What are you going to do? I want to learn more about them, you know. I would even love to go out in the woods. That's why when I go out during the daytime, I don't even go out there with a camera. Of course, I got my cell phone, you know, it's got a camera on or whatever, but I'll go out there, I'll have a bag of chips with me and stuff like that. Maybe one day I'll have an interaction. I don't know. I would love that, you know. But at nighttime, you know, I know these creatures are real, and at night, even during the day, when you're in the woods, that's their home. They know you're there. Mm-hmm. So at nighttime, there's no way I'm going to be able to see one walking around the woods with a flashlight. So I'll drive, you know, I'll mount the cameras on the outside of my vehicle, the night vision cameras, and I'll drive real slow, and I got the monitor inside, and I'll pull over and park and sit there for hours at a time with my windows rolled up, hoping that something walks in that field of view of my camera so I can see it and so I can record it. If I get to see it again, I'm hoping to look at it differently. And I hope I'm not to be scared like I was the first time. You know, you can't prepare for anything in life. You really can't prepare at the 100% level for anything, because anything can go wrong. You can be 1% off in the good or in the bad. So if I do have another sighting, I don't know if I'm going to be that scared again. I don't think I will, but I want to look at it differently. It'd be so great one day to have a really close encounter experience with one, hopefully in a nice way. They're pretty big creatures, I'll tell you that.
Did I really sound like that? I did, didn't I? I know I did.
Yeah, he did.
It's funny, Will, because shortly after we had our encounter, I was ready to go right back out there. And Wes was like, "Are you freaking crazy? We're not going back out there." So that's where the whole insane thing came from. I got that. Yeah, I got that.
I think everybody has their own opinion, you know, view. This guy, you know, I mean, he probably ought to be a little more cautious, but, you know, I guess you can't help but want to go. It's like, you know, after I had my first encounter with those two, you know, that was our first thing, you know, was, you know, grab our hunting rifles, we're going to go track them. I don't know what we thought we were going to do if we found them, but, you know, we figured we'd deal with that when we reached that point.
It's funny because right after it happened, I couldn't really talk Wes into going. I think he's going back out there again to try to, you know, to have another encounter, and I think he's changed his mind since then. But man, I could have went out there with a tank, and Wes still wouldn't have gone if we were in a tank, you know.
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Now he's talking about going out in a Jeep Wrangler, so you know.
Yeah.
I think he's changed his mind a little bit now.
Yeah. Well, it's such a shell shock when you see one, or, you know, like an encounter. I mean, there's nothing that prepares you for that. You can't prepare. You could sit and research all you want for 20 years and know what you're dealing, or, you know, have somewhat of an idea of what you're dealing with. But when you actually see one, I mean, there's no way to prepare for that. I wasn't prepared.
A lot of these researchers out there today, if they, you know, most of them have never seen one. If they actually were to run into one, I think they'd probably wet themselves.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for the size. The size of them.
It's a shock. It's definitely a shock on the system.
Yeah.
And it's really too bad there'll never be another Green or Dahinden.
Yeah, those guys, those are some pretty big shoes to fill, though.
Very much so. Very much.
Especially Rene. Like I said, I didn't realize he was such, you know, larger-than-life character. And that guy's hilarious.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about him on one of the shows. He covers a lot of ground.
I wish the audio was better when he was tearing apart Grover Krantz.
I must look and see what else I can find with him.
Yeah, I must have busted up laughing like 5 or 6 times during the whole thing.
And just knowing him personally for so many years, he was like that. You couldn't help but say he would have us in tears all the time. And he told some pretty hilarious stories, too. He came over to visit one time, and there was a whole room of my friends sitting there, that wanted to meet him. And he came in, and unless you knew Rene, he could change his looks on his face where, he could conceal what he was thinking. And he was getting ready to tell. He started off telling the story, and he gave me a look that I knew was just complete BS. I knew he was going to pull the wool over all these people's eyes, so I just kind of covered my mouth and hung in the back of the room. And he sucked them all in to this joke, this story, that sounded so legitimate. And he just kind of put his pipe in his mouth and grinned when he was done. And a couple of my friends were like, well, and then what happened, at the end? And they were like, no, it was a joke after he was finished telling the story. But he was like that. I mean, he was a character.
Yeah, he was hilarious. If you get a chance
when I come up and see you guys sometime, I'll tell you that particular story.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have to do that in 2014, and I know, Will, I know Wes feels the same way. We really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and your information with him and I. And I've said before, you taking us kind of under your wing. I mean, we talk on the air, off the air, but, I wish we could talk more off the air, just on a personal basis, but we're busy and we have our lives.
We'll get our chance.
I'm really looking forward to you either coming this way or us coming to see you and going out, spending a few days out in the woods and,
absolutely.
boots on the ground and seeing what we can find. I can't wait till that day. So I just wanted to tell you thank you, and I know Wes feels the same way. So we appreciate it.
I appreciate you two guys also, You're two of the very few that I would share a lot of my secrets with.
Yeah, and you have. And I've learned. I know Wes and I both. We've learned a lot from you, and every time I talk to you, I like I said, what Wes said earlier. We're new to this, and we've just recently became fully involved in it, and I learned something every time I talk to you. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, anytime, fellas, anytime.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I think our ratings would go through the roof if we. If we had a lot of the stuff we said off the air, we actually said on the air.
Probably so.
I think it would too. Yeah, I think it would.
If people only knew.
That's what we do. We do a show sometimes. The behind the scenes cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of like the bloopers of the Sasquatch Chronicles.
That would be funny, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just take bits and pieces of certain things that are said and play them. Oh my God, people would come uncorked.
We should probably do something like that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Maybe we'll leave the part out where Will calls people douchebags, but I don't know. I guess we could include that.
Well, I know, some of them are douchebags, and they really ought to be called douchebags. When I was a drill sergeant in the Army, I got no greater pleasure than actually saying something to somebody's face that I was thinking, and just looking at their reaction.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I love that shock effect. And who was good at that was Rene. I think that's where I picked that habit up. He was, that guy, he was always very conscious about his image. And I watched him many times with reporters and, TV, radio, and newspapers. He said newspapers were the worst. And they are. They never print exactly what you tell them. They always change shit. But he would tell them, he says, they'd want to go places or go talk to him. They'd say, okay, you got to check your recorders at the door, put the cameras away. He says, then we can talk. But he wouldn't, he was very careful around those people, but off the record, that guy was something else. And he would send me letters, things like, oh, God, I remember this. I told you the thing about with PhDs. This is because of Krantz primarily, but other PhDs he had dealings with. He'd say, I asked so-and-so, I met so-and-so, and he said he had a PhD, and he says, I asked him what the prognosis was. Because he considered it an incurable mental disease.
Yeah, he did. It's like I was telling you before the show started. I mean, he just railed into Krantz. He spent like an hour and a half just railing into him. I mean, he was harsh, but he was fair. Like I said, someone in the audience said, "Oh, well, Grover Krantz is a hoaxer," and Dahinden, I mean, he just spent the last hour and a half verbally raping this guy, and he stopped and said, "You know what? He's not a hoaxer."
You ever see a picture of Krantz? You ever see a picture of Krantz? He had this big mole between his eyes.
Yeah.
And Rene and I were sitting talking one time, and like I said, Rene I practically wet myself sitting and listening to him, in our conversations. He'd say, he looked very serious, and he'd say, I'm sure that Grover's a very nice guy. He says, when he opened his mouth to speak, someone should run up, and he says, that's his start-stop button. They should run up and hit that. And he wouldn't stop talking, and everybody would like the guy.
It's the easy button.
Yeah. Oh, man. Well, I'm going to go take some NyQuil, boys. I'm dying here.
Get some rest and drink lots of fluids.
Yeah, I will.
And that doesn't mean beer. Okay.
Well, they are fluids, and that is considered a food.
Exactly. It's protein.
That's right, protein.
All right, guys. Well, you guys have a good Christmas. If I don't talk, Wes, I know I'll talk to you. Will, I probably will talk to you too. But if I don't, you guys have a good Christmas. It's nice talking to you guys, man.
All right, fellas, you too.
All right, have a good night, guys.